the word religion is meant to come with this sort of false, excessive reverence for something, right? And that's the thing that's dangerous.
Thank you, Chris Wood, for being a Patreon member. Here's your question to Dr. Richard Carrier. If humanity were to advance towards a scientific golden age like in Star Trek, what does Dr. Carrier see as the necessary progression of religious belief and practice for that to happen? Appreciate you both.
Wow, I'm not sure how to answer that question. Obviously, religious institutions have to fail, right? They just basically have to fade out. Because otherwise they're always going to get in the way of any real humanistic progress towards a better society. So, but, I mean, you could say it's possible that religions could all liberalize to the point where they don't get in the way, and maybe even enhance and help. And so that gets to the difference between liberal, like, so for example, liberal Christianity versus conservative Christianity. And conservative Christianity is way worse. We definitely have to get rid of all of that. The liberal religions maybe could survive and find a place. The problem I have with that, and I have an article called "What's the Harm?" That I talk about this. And I talk first about conservative, the dangers and problems of conservative religion is obvious, right? Like how it holds us back, how it keeps us doing inhumane things, and so on. But liberal Christianity, the threat is harder to detect, right? So the problem with liberal thinking in religion is that it's still, to have it be a religion, it still has to be, you still have to have an epistemology that allows you to believe false things. And if you have an epistemology, a way of knowing, a way of deciding what to believe, that allows you to believe false things, well, you're constantly then in danger of slipping into something that's toxic or dangerous or gets in the way or whatever. So we really need a humanistic epistemology that maximizes our elimination of false beliefs, right? Like that's what and you can never have a perfect epistemology. We're always going to have false beliefs, but a good epistemology is going to be constantly questioning them. So it is going to be winnowing, right? So it's always going to be reducing the false beliefs. It's not going to be increasing them. And so once you adopt that stance, it's not really possible to maintain any liberal religions unless they just aren't really religions and they're really just cultural fads, right?
Like metaphors or like symbols that have meaning, or artistic, like humanism.
Yeah, you could say like cultural Judaism, for instance, where there's no actual religious content. It's just the rituals and the particular way of living is comforting or has personal value and so on. It's more aesthetic than anything else, or more exploratory. It's a heuristic or something. You could do like neo-paganism, where the neo-pagans admit the gods don't exist. They're just our psychological concepts. And the rituals are just ways of meditation, and like all of those
therapeutics. So
yeah, you could turn it all and give it a scientific basis, but it eliminates the supernatural, right? So you can have these, but you wonder, like, would that even really still be a religion per se, right? Like at the point where it's really, it's all just, aesthetics and ritual. It's all science backed. Is it a religion then, or is it just culture?
I mean, Buddhism, right? There's many atheistic Buddhists.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, the problem is that all Buddhists have some sort of weird supernaturalist belief that's false, right? So there's still a lot of things wrong with Buddhism.
Yeah.
But yeah, the idea is like, what would happen if you got rid of all the superstitious beliefs and all of the supernatural beliefs, all the false beliefs of Buddhism? What's left would be kind of like a philosophy, a choice, a way of living, yada yada. But it would really just be culture. It would be culture or philosophy. So why not just call it that, right? Like it says, if you like water down religion so much that you're just turning it into background noise, or just a useful tool like Star Trek fandom. Like if you're a Trekkie and you dress in the Trekkie things and you adopt the values. It reminds me of have you ever seen Trekkies? And then there was the Trekkies 2, these documentaries, where the director goes around and talks to the hardcore fanatics, right? And like some that are like super extreme fanatics. But he talks about the phenomenon of being a Trekkie, right? And the first one was a really good, cute, kind of comedic sort of documentary. It's very interesting. When he did the second one, he did it internationally, and he went around. And one of the things in the international one is he got to, I think it was Ukraine or maybe Bosnia. I can't remember. It was some country over there that dealt with war and lost a lot, right? And he was talking to the Trekkies there, and they had a completely different take on it. For them, the sort of humanistic vision of the future in Star Trek was to them an aspirational goal. right? We're looking at all the shitty shit that's going on around us, and like we want that world. And so for them, like the Trekkie fandom and like wearing the uniforms and watching the shows and like learning the lore and all of that stuff was just a part of their way of like asserting and then working towards achieving the values that are actually good, right? So in that like is that a religion? Like, do you count that as a religion?
Okay.
Or
This is a really, okay, I understand that. So James George Frazer, I know, is like, he really popularized this idea, not just the dying and rising God stuff, which was really cool, and we definitely think he's right about that. Whether he had all the data, there was stuff we didn't know about Mesopotamia that we've learned since then. All sorts of cool stuff, right? Philologists have learned how to properly pronounce Gilgamesh. I mean, there's all sorts of cool, interesting.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff he was wrong about, but like if you think broad strokes,
Yeah,
yeah,
he kind of has this model, and a lot of anthropologists have like dismissed this model, this evolutionary linear view that humans worked off magic, then we became religious, then we became scientific, and he thinks scientific is not barbaric. He used barbaric or savage was often the term, and people thought, oh, when you read it, and I read the entire tome, and it's ridiculously long.
yeah.
I think many scholars misinterpret him to be using like this, like, dark-skinned people are these savages. He talks about European savages and barbaric Europeans
Yeah.
that are behind. His point is science is the pinnacle, right? And I do think he's on the right track with that. The point is his linear model. Well, this is interesting just to kind of point out what you're describing about these Trekkians, because it's not one-to-one kind of analogy, but like he points out in this long tome that people who had magic, sympathetic magic, various forms of magic, were doing false science. And he even nods to thinking our ancestors in the book and says, look, they were wrong, but at least they were heading down the right track of proto-science later.
Yeah.
Religion, he had a bigger problem with. He said religion confuses things and does crap that at least they thought they had control of the world. They could control the gods with magic.
Co-ops and impairs, yeah.
Yeah, and then eventually to science. But this point of like, these Trekkians are like, what do we do with our time sometimes? So why not play make-believe? I mean, even Satanists dress up in dark Gothic stuff in their church, but they don't, their own version of church, but they don't believe in gods or the devil, most of them. They're playing kind of this role. We're playing a role, right? What if we create a religion devoid of the supernatural, devoid of the fantastic, but we play make-believe toward an aspiring goal?
Yeah. That's like certain branches of neo-paganism are like that, right? So it's where the idea that the rejecting the supernatural, magic is really just a meditative exercise. It's like a way of working things out in your mind, etc. You don't actually control the world through magic, right? But there's no actual gods, but the gods represent things. It like affects us psychologically in a useful way to characterize aspects of the world in terms of God and so on. So so there's ways of doing that. But the problem is that once you've gotten to that point, what is that even really a religion at that point? And the question, like, what would make it a religion? And usually if you try to like come up with answers, they're not good things. So like the idea that you can't question a holy text, right? That the text can't be wrong. Well, that's a bad idea. That's what makes religion toxic, right? And so, but if you get rid of that, well, like if you were to have like say like, well, the Bible was written by a bunch of dudes who are wrong about a bunch of stuff, like how do you build a religion out of that, right? It's much more difficult. And are you really doing anything differently than fandom or philosophy, right? Like is that low? So like, what would it even mean to keep calling that a religion? Like, and I think the idea is that the word religion. This is probably because of the dominant sort of toxic imperialist religions that control our societies, Islam, Christianity mainly, right? The word religion is meant to come with this sort of false excessive reverence for something, right? And that's the thing that's dangerous, is when you have this idea, something you can't question, something you can't doubt, something you can't get rid of, like or you can't even question it, like how dare you? That kind of attitude. So religion comes with this sort of, assumption of reverence is not inherently bad. Like we do have to revere things, and it's a useful tool. But if religion is all about like things you're not even allowed to change, you're not allowed to question, you're not allowed to change or whatever,
Dogma.
then you're stuck. Yeah, exactly. Then you're stuck, and that's going to get in the way. So if you get rid of that, like if you get this epistemology that allows you to get rid of all the false beliefs, allows you to constantly double check, like the things that you do believe in, you keep checking in and making sure that they're true. And so they'll survive review, because that's what a good epistemology does, is it reconfirms things. You don't stop questioning them, but you don't, like, the questioning them doesn't mean you abandon them. It just means I'm just checking in, make sure that that's true before I go on, right? Like, and just keep back checking in. So that kind of, if that becomes your reverence for checking in, reverence for double checking all the time, reverence for questioning, reverence for critical thought, well, you're really just talking about philosophy, right? Like, that's basically just philosophy. So should, as I said before, like, should philosophy just, like, that should just be our religion, right? And so I think if you frame it that way and say religion should just be your, philosophy should just be your religion, and then it's all just cultural differences. So, like, Trekkies have one way of doing it. Star Wars fans have another way of doing it. Lord of the Rings fans have another way of doing it. Neo-pagans have another way of doing it, like, and yeah, I'm sure Buddhists could come up with a way, and so on. These, like, sort of toxic imperialist religions, Christianity and Islam, I don't know that there's a retool that would work. I think they're too far gone in terms of this excess reverence and this excess control.
Yeah, only with the Father through the Son. Like, there's
the hierarchies of authority and control too, right?
That too.
The idea that the authority trumps evidence, like that whole idea, like, if you get rid of that, Christianity and Islam kind of dissolve, really, like, because they're so dependent on these pillars, whereas, like, Buddhism is not, neo-paganism is not. So I think, like, these sort of other weird, what we call weird religions, in the sense that they're less common or unfamiliar to people, have a better chance of sticking around, I think.
That actually is what happened in my personal life. You kind of, in a nutshell, described it, because when I started realizing comparative mythology and I found that in my Bible, I'm like, hold on, I find these stories have so much in common, and these tropes and themes and elements, stories outside of it. The first question, which is my philosophy and me coming up, was, why did this one happen but those didn't, right? It was first question, right? And once I knocked down the pillar of historicity, that I had to believe this one happened but all others didn't, that it looked like, I then realized, hold on, they're in the same category of genre. There's something going on here, whether they're genetic or not. And I think what happened is that strength you're talking about, that the pillars have, that these toxic religions carry, dissolved, and I saw no use for them anymore at all, which is why I was able to land my airplane. I didn't go one day Christian, one day atheist. It was like I was able to let go and be able to breathe. The weight of the
right.
Oh, hold on. Now I can read the Gospels as fiction and enjoy going, okay, hold on. And I can also go, that was dumb as shit what Jesus just said. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. And that gets to the question of, like, the idea of, like, demythologizing Christianity, and like, could you have one of these sort of, like, rationalistic versions of Christianity? And I think you can't, because you'd say, like, okay, we're going to admit the Gospels are just fallible human documents. They're going to be full of error, etc. They're not going to be completely reliable or whatever. But once you admit that, you go, well, then that means there's a better book. Why then use this one? Right? Like, so you could, and even that's what you get to, like, Star Trek, where Bradbury and his whole model is trying to get the better book, right? They're trying to produce the better book. And then, so you could have, in theory, like, I don't know how much, like, you find this online for sure, you have, where you critique the model, like, you say, okay, he had this utopian vision, but there's still some problems here, right? Like, we could make this better, so that you could keep improving the book, right? So you're not stuck, that your entire, like, your moral system has to be based on season 1, and it's just everything, you know what I mean? Like, if it's not in there, then it's not true, or, like, you have to admit, like, actually there's better versions, like, we've better visions of the model of the future of society, and so on. And one of the things that I'm reminded of with this is, one of my favorite ones is Next Generation, where they have, it's the one with Mark Twain.
Okay.
So they have a time travel thing, and Mark Twain ends up entangled with them and on the Enterprise, and they're showing him the Enterprise and talking about how peaceful their society is, and like oh, everybody has, nobody starves, everybody's got, it's a perfect economy, everybody's yada yada, and he's like looking around and says, I don't know, this looks like a warship to me.
Mark Twain.
Right, yeah. And it's like he immediately pegs him. This looks a little imperialistic. I don't know. And so like you can see that's a critique of the mod. Like, you have this sort of utopian vision, but you still got these warships. Like, so clearly you've not solved everything, right? Like this, and so this idea, like, and so they wrote that in. So it's like it's a self-critique, right?
Right.
Of the model of the sort of ideal utopian society they create. But that's good. That's a good, reverent way of getting better books, because so that made the whole book of Star Trek, a better book by having that in it.
But isn't it? Because I haven't watched this, and I'm not in the lore.
Yeah.
That would be. But wouldn't that have been common sense, especially with to maintain the peace? You have
Yeah, right. No, so that's what starts the whole conversation is like, okay, does this better society, does it have to have warships? Like you just said, like, is this an impossible, we can't get rid of this? Or do we have a blind spot there where we think that we need this mechanism of maintaining control and stuff? And there's arguments on both sides. So I'm not saying either one is right or wrong. The point is that you're allowed to question it, right? And so that's what makes it better than religion. And it's also, you think like Trekkies don't think of Star Trek as some sort of literal true thing that like you can't question, you can't critique it, it can't get better, or that kind of like the reverence, the inappropriate reverence, I should say, not just reverence, it's inappropriate, like excessive reverence that is typical of religion. It doesn't have that, right? And so like that's what makes it better, but then that's also what makes it not really a religion per se.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, and I just you made me think, you guys messed my brain up with this because it made me think of the earth, and I'm like, if only all humans would just bury the hatchets together. If we could all together at once would put it down, we're putting it down, we're all on the same page, and there wasn't some trick.
Yeah.
Are you assholes? The Russians ended up not listening, and they did, like, could we all at once just make it to where we don't bomb, we don't kill? The problem is, I can't imagine that they ever, just based on beliefs, ideology, territory.
That's right.
There's so much shit.
There's so much to unwind, and what's happened is, of course, like there's so much paranoia, right? Because there's been so much abuse and so much corruption and so much taking advantage and so much killing and all of this stuff that you have the Israel-Palestine whole situation is based on lack of trust, because both sides have been dicks, right? And so that neither side trusts the other. That's why you can't have a peace agreement, because the Palestinians have been fucked over by the Israelis have violated treaty after treaty.
Right.
Why should they believe that they're going to hold another treaty? Right. And then they have the same thing. The Israelis look at the Palestinians. You keep violating treaties over and over again. We can't trust you, right? So like neither side can trust the other because of their prior bad behavior has created this sort of accumulated
next to each other
distrust. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's all why does Israel even need to be there, et cetera. Like you get into like deeper questions of this, but what makes that really an impossible situation is that you can't unwind all of this history that's created this justified paranoia where no one trusts anyone to put down the hatchet.
Yeah.
That's why no one does. And so it becomes difficult to figure out what's the pathway out of there. It's not an easy solve. But of course, this idea, we're talking about this utopian future that we can work toward, it would be based on asking exactly this question, where everyone is in the same boat. Everyone is like well-versed in game theory. Everyone is well-versed in, we could just do it. Right, like we just stop distrusting each other and just do it, right? Like just have an agreement and go for it. Give up some. You got to be able to. Each side's got to give up something. Like this kind of. There are ways to do this. We know we have models. Game theory's got a lot of good models for how to do this, but you have to convince everybody to think rationally, and that's the problem. Is that and like you said, religion is in the way of this, but there's also like ideologies that are not necessarily religious that are also just as false and just as toxic and just as impeding, like getting in the way of getting to a better world. And so, like there's a lot to clean up, and everybody wants to protect their thing. No one wants to give up anything, even when it's super bad. And you can convince them, you might not even be able to convince them it's super bad, but even if you do, they still don't want to give it up, right? It's really hard because of the emotional attachment and the irrationality of people. So it's a challenging problem. But this is what I mean by religion getting in the way. And I have written on this idea that there are ideologies that are just as bad as religion. So I don't think like if we get rid of religion that we've solved all our problems, right? Like there's still other ideologies that can toxically get in our way. Religion is just one category of this, right? So I don't want to give the impression that I think if we got rid of religion, everything would be hunky-dory.
Yeah.
There's still work to do. But religion is a problem, and we do need to get rid of it.
Thank you.